Hi everyone. In this video, we're finally going to bring together everything that we've been doing so far, and add to it a few additional CSS styles to put together something that looks like a real web page, like something that you might actually, see on the web. So I'm going to show you how to create a web page that looks like this, where it could be for a business, and it'll have some links across the top to the other pages on the website, and it'll have some homepage images and some text, and the text will be styled and the boxes will be styled, and it'll bring together a lot of that stuff that we've been doing so far about putting things in boxes, styling the boxes, as to sort of organizing the structure of the page, and then also a few additional details about how to set colors of things and how to set different font styles. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is just lay out all of the I'm just going to lay out all of the HTML, just put the content. There really isn't that much content. It's kind of a lot of white space, and then there's going to be a bunch of CSS. So my site is for a music store. I call it Ryan's Guitars. I have a link to my CSS, and I'm not using JavaScript, so this is just where I'll start adding my body. And first of all, I'm actually going to put the whole thing inside of a div, because you saw that there was a border around the useful part of the page, and the div is what allows that all to have a border. The div itself has a border, so I'm going to have a div. I'm going to give it an ID called page. Oops, I did not close that. And I'm going to close my div tag. I'm just going to type everything that belongs to this div in between these two div tags. So the first thing at the top of my page was my heading. I'll say H1, and it'll just be the name of the site. And then I had that navigation section, so I'm going to make that an ordered list. You might remember that from really early on. We did some unordered lists. I'm going to give this an ID as well. Navigation, because that's going to be all the different links to the different sections of the website. I'm not actually going to create all of those different pages. There were like 5 different sections there. I'm just creating the home page, and these links will actually be dead links. So I can create a bunch of list items like a href equals absolutely nothing, just so that HTML, just so that the browser treats it like a link, even though it's actually a link to nothing. We want it to be a link just for styling purposes, really. In reality, you would have a link, but there's not going to be anything for any of us to link to. And then I'm just going to copy that a bunch of times, and I have home, for sale, repairs, about, and contact. And that will be my entire navigation section, so I will close the unordered list. And next I'll need some regular text that'll be inside a paragraph. Well, yeah. So this is just going to be the text that kind of the homepage text that's going to describe the business. And I believe I put that under my homepage pictures. So I'm actually going to, what I'm going to do is kind of, you could do the same thing with a div, I suppose. I'm just going to put this in a paragraph tag because I think the styling is going to be the same. Actually, I'm going to create I'm going to style the boxes in a really similar way. So even though it's not really a paragraph, I want it to be a whole new block, right? I want it to be a block level box. I want it to skip a line. I want it to be on its own. I want the pictures to be on their own line, separate from the unordered list, separate from the actual text. So I'm just going to put it in a paragraph tag because that's the default behavior for that. But it's actually going to contain a bunch of pictures. But the pictures themselves are inline, so they'll line up from left to right. So I'm creating a paragraph tag to skip a line, and then I'm just using image tags from left to right. Remember, like before we had to use line breaks to skip between pictures because they default to going left, like across the screen left to right. So I'm going to say image src equals, and I have to fill that in later, but I'm going to have a picture of a Les Paul guitar. I keep closing my tags too early. And I will just skip that because I'm going to have 3 pictures. I'm going to copy that, and I'll also have a Marshall amp and a Fender Strat. And now I need to upload my pictures, so you can do the same with whatever pictures you choose for your business homepage. I need to upload. I already have my pictures saved, which saves me a little bit of time. And now I can just type in the file names. And that should be all of my HTML. It's got my heading, my H1 with my description of my page, with my heading for my page. I've got my navigation box, which is going to be a UL. I've got my paragraph box that is going to contain all of the images lined up from left to right, and then I've got my paragraph box that actually contains the text. Alright, so time to work on the CSS. So I'll start by styling the body. Remember, CSS, it's usually a good idea to start with your most general stylings, and then as you go down the page, start adding specifics, because things that it reads later, it also whatever the browser reads later, it updates last, and that means that's what's going to display. Generally, going from when you go from more general to more specific, it the specifics override anyway. But it's always good to like sort of force the browser to do what you want it to do as best you can. So let's start off by doing pick a font. I'm going to say font family, and I kind of wanted it to look like that typewriter style text, which is Courier. And so this leads to a sort of discussion of different types of fonts. I mentioned this a little bit before, but at the end, notice that there is a description that's just a very generic, like kind of describes what type of font this is. Monospace. A monospace font is one that has every letter is spaced the same. So many fonts don't do that, but a monospace font does. And so it kind of ends up looking like just very uniform. And remember, I'll just type font family again just so you can see. There's sans serif fonts, which are fonts that don't have the little sort of tails on the ends of the letters. There's serifed fonts that do have those little tails on the end of the letters, like Times New Roman. And there are like cursive and fantasy, which are like, more elaborate looking fonts that you probably wouldn't use for your basic text it's meant to be read. Like, like a whole block of text, like for it's meant to be your main content. It's more for like styling logos and headings and very small sections of text. So those are kind of different font groups. You can be as specific as you want, but you should also include a generic as well, because if the browser doesn't happen to have the font that you want, it should have something to default to. All right, so I'm going to erase this because I actually only want one font family. So my basic font's going to be Courier, and I'll set my background color for this background of page generally. And remember, before I've been typing out, like I want something to be kind of light gray, but before I've been typing out names of colors, there are a couple other ways to enter colors that CSS can handle. So I'm just going to show you another one. And I already figured out this, like I already have like notes that I just like guess that this is exactly this color, but notice as soon as I typed in EF, it shows what that color is, which is like a very pale sort of gray. So what this is actually a hexadecimal number, which is kind of misleading because it's a bunch of letters, but I don't want to get too detailed into this, but hexadecimal numbers are numbers, like instead of going from 0 through 9 in each place value, like you could in each space there's only one digit. There can actually be 16 possible digits, so it uses some numbers or uses some letters to represent more numbers in each place value, which is I'm not going to get too deep into what that means because it's a whole big thing. But the reason computers use hexadecimal numbers is because it's a very neat and tidy way to represent binary, which is what computers are end up doing in the background. So all you really need to know is that if you're using a hex value, that's a hexadecimal number, a hex value, in CSS, the way you identify that is with a hashtag and then the hexadecimal number. So you can actually literally like use numbers. Let me just show you one that's a number. All right, what color is that? Oh, it's some really dark color, right? No, it's kind of like blue. So it is a number. It's just the one that I kind of had already pre-selected was just turned out to be those numbers were represented by letters. Anyway, this has a built-in color picker, so you can also Google color pickers that might be better, but REPL has a built-in color picker, so if you're not sure what color you want, you can kind of like hover over your color selection. That's what I did. I hovered over my color selection, and I'm like, but maybe I want a different color. You can drag around to choose different possibilities. Okay, I just want like a pale color. And it will fill in the hex value for you. So if you have everything all solid, notice it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 digits. If you start sliding this slider, it actually adds digits because it's adding a whole extra property that it's keeping track of, which is transparency. This slider is for transparency. And so this kind of gets to another method of entering colors that I want to show you, which is RGB colors. So if you say RGB, notice it gives you an indication of what it needs. If you say RGB, you have to put in parentheses how much red, that's what RGB stands for, how much red, how much green, and how much blue you want. So you could say RGB, I want 0 red, I want a very small amount of green, and I want maybe a small amount of blue. Well, it's very dark. Okay, I want tons of green. Now it's just green, right? I want a ton of blue. Right now it's kind of turquoise. So as you can see, it's like filling in. It's filling in the color. So there's also a possibility of doing RGBA, and that A represents the transparency. So you would add another number here, just like when you slide this around. Notice the number, when I slide this around, goes from just 1, or not even existing, all the way down to 0, and so anything in between 1 and 0 can represent different transparencies, so like 0.37. So you actually have 3 different ways you can enter colors now. You can enter a color just by typing the name of the color, which is pretty limited because the color name has to be one of the colors available in the list that CSS can handle. It doesn't handle every color by name because there's too many possibilities. Alternatively, you can use RGB, which is just red, green, blue, or you can do RGBA, which is red, green, blue, transparency, or you can use hex. Hex is more compact. There isn't that much to read. It isn't very descriptive and human readable. But I'm going to stick with hex because in the end, if I want to edit it, I can just use a color picker anyway. I don't really have to know what this says. And you know what? RGB can be pretty difficult to read too, even though it represents color values. The way the computer interprets those color values is sometimes tough to really like intuitively understand. So in the end, you end up using a color picker tool anyway. If you don't like the one that's built into REPL, there's good ones on the internet. You can Google one. Anyway, let's move on. So that's a bit about selecting color. Let's see what I've got so far. Okay, so you can see a few things. It's really nothing like what our end result is going to be. There's a lot more styling to do. So let's add some more styling for that div that contained most of my page. For one thing, I actually put a limit on how big it can get, and that's a property called max width. So I specified what the biggest the page could be. You can also set a min width in case you don't want it to collapse down too much. I set a margin, and I set the margin values all at once. So this is my preferred way of doing it. I just usually, whenever possible, I try, unless I have a very specific reason for doing so, I don't usually do like margin top, margin bottom, margin left, margin right. There's just more things to type. Sometimes it's necessary because you only want to edit the margin for one component, but or one side of the component. But I'm just going to do 10 pixels, auto, 10 pixels, and auto. I believe that's what I want. I'm just going to Google really quickly. CSS margin. You should get used to doing this. W3 Schools is like one of the top resources. I actually put a link to this in the Google Classroom in the resources tab. It's really, really useful. It's usually like the first thing that shows up when you type in, when you look for a reference for CSS. So I just want to make sure, I want to look at what the order is for the values. It is top for the shorthand. Yeah, it's top, bottom, left, right. Or no, top, right, bottom, left. Top, right, bottom, left. That order. Yeah, that's what I want. So my top and my bottom are fixed at 10 pixels. The right and left are just going to adjust according to the width of the page. So let's move on. Padding, I'm going to set to 20 pixels. Remember, padding is the distance between the content and the border. Border, I'll set to a 4 pixel border, double, which is 2 lines, and I will make it black. Let's run this and see what we've got now. So now you can see we've got a double line border. We've got some distance, right? We've got that that padding between the content and the border, and we've got a margin. There's some distance between the edge of the page and the div. Remember, this hashtag page, this ID page is a div that is a container that contains all of the content. So that's why this box is drawn around. It's drawn around everything. Okay, so let's move on. I need to set my background color for just the inside of the div. Background color for inside the div. I'll just make it white. And now let's style the H1. So my heading, so I'll do my most specific choice first. Newton SC is a font I would like, and it will probably render in a real browser, but I think it might not in REPL because it's not like a full-featured browser. Then I'll add a few other options that are really similar. Notice once I typed Cambria, it filled in all the other common things that are just like it, like Georgia and Times New Roman, and finally generic serif font. So it gives a whole bunch of different options. It's going to load your first one first if it's there, then it's going to go down the line from left to right. So you can add your own font. A good way to find fonts, honestly, is to just type in font family and then look at the different options that pop up. It doesn't give you any examples, so you can just Google it, look at examples of fonts, do a Google search, find some fonts that you find are interesting looking, I'm also going to add something for mine. Font variant. Since this is just the H1, I want mine to have a certain style where all of the letters are capital letters. Even the lowercase letters are just smaller capital letters. And notice when I type font variant, it gives me that as one of the options, small caps. I kind of like that style just for my heading. And then I'll make sure that my text is aligned with the center of the page. So I'll say text align center. How is it looking now? Getting better. It's getting closer to what I want. Notice I've got that font choice. Text is aligned in the center. All right, let's style the navigation, which was that the UL. So the entire UL. So remember that the UL is the box. The unordered list is the box around all of the list items, not the items themselves. The box around the list items. So first, let's set the width of the box. I'll just say 570 pixels. Let's set some padding for the box. Not too much padding, just enough so that there's a little bit of room in between the edge of the box and its content. I'm going to set a margin, 0 pixels on the top and bottom, automatic on left and right. And I want a border. This is where I get those lines from. If you remember from the example that I showed you, I had lines on the top and bottom that just kind of looked like there's lines that were drawn across the screen. They're actually borders. They just don't border the whole box. It's just on the top. So this is one case where I'm going to be specific about where I want the border to go. I'm going to say border top. 2, just a really small line, 2 pixels. Just a solid line and just black. I'll say border bottom, an even thinner line. I think I have this underline is telling me that I messed something up, so I'm going to fix that. And then I also want to align text align center. And that's just as for styling the box. I still need to style each item inside the box. So for each list item, I want to, this is a very important setting, display inline. This is what turns it from this list that goes from top to bottom into a line of items. So let me just show you what it does without this for a minute. As my REPL fails to connect. We'll see what happens here. All right, I guess I'm not going to demonstrate it because I don't want to waste your time watching my REPL fail to connect. So I'm just going to put, oh, there it is. All right, connected, never mind. Let me just run it just so you can see. You see it has a box around it, it has a thick border on the top and a thin border on the bottom, but the items are still bullet points. So the thing that gets rid of that and changes the way it displays is the display property inline. I don't want them to be block level items that line up from top to bottom. I want them to line up from side to side. And also give them a little bit of a margin in between each other. Nothing on the top, that's not necessary because they'll be side by side. However, on the sides, I do want some margin. So now, Now it's lined up from side to side. I'll style my paragraph tags. Again, basically everything is getting text align center because my page is text align. My page is aligned over the center of the page. I'm going to set the width. I'll set my margin. And this is a new property you haven't seen before, font weight. Font weight just means like bold or italic or something like that. I'm just going to make sure it's specified exactly to normal. And for my anchor tags, where my links go, there's a few styles to add for that, because normally links are kind of ugly, so you do have to sort of intentionally style them if you don't want them to be that ugly underlined purple and blue thing that they do by default. So I'm going to set the color. Instead of being that ugly purple thing, I'm just going to make it black. Text. Let's see. So, I mean, I could have just typed everything out in uppercase, but I just kind of want to show you that this property exists. You can actually do text transform, and you can take stuff that isn't uppercase and just make it uppercase. So there's actually a property for that. Text decoration. I'm going to say none. Now what this does, text decoration is the thing that gets rid of the underlines. So there, by default, see how it says decorations apply to a font used for an element's text. When I hover over it, that means like in the case of anchor tags, the normal text decoration is underlines. It's kind of ugly. So once I get rid of the text decoration, when it loads, it's going to load, as long as it's doing what I expect it to do, it's going to load without those underlines, and the underlines are gone. I prefer it without underlines. I'll add some padding because they are a bit close together. And I'm not just so you know, I'm not just like magically guessing all of the exact padding. I'm doing this from notes. Remember, I showed you a sample of this page at the very beginning of the video. All right, so if you're working on web pages and you have to do a lot of trial and error, that's normal. Especially for a beginner. I have to do a lot of trial and error too, and I've been using HTML and CSS for years. It just is what it is. Sometimes you try something and it's close to what you want, but it isn't what you want. You have to tweak it a little bit. That's just how this is. So I just want to make you aware that I set it up so that I have notes and I'm looking at the notes and I know what I'm going to do in advance, so that you don't have to watch me like guess and check. It's like it failed to load everything for some reason. I'm just going to let it do its thing. Having a bunch of REPL issues today. I'm just going to move on and hope REPL sorts itself out. So another thing that is pretty cool that hopefully I'll get to show you is something called a pseudo element. So that basically means it's kind of like an element, but it's not really. It's like an extra condition added to an element. And what I'm going to do is, for some anchor tags, it'll be a::hover. So this is, what do I want to happen when I hover the mouse over the anchor tag. And what I want to happen is for it to change color. This is something you see in websites all the time. I'll just make it red. But it's super common. When you hover your mouse, it actually changes the color. And I think that should be fine. And finally, for my images, I do need to set the, well, let me just see if it's going to load. I've been having trouble getting it to load properly. There we go. So you notice my image is way too large. All my images are way too large. So what I'm going to do is I'll just set the height and let it auto correct for the width. So I think if I set the height to 140 pixels, with the pictures that I have, that ends up fitting nicely. Right. Keep in mind your photos may vary. So you know, what if you make it a little bit small? I'm not even gonna. It's been loading so slowly. I'm not gonna even mess around with it and slow this video down even more. But if I made this number smaller, it would shrink the images, and it would just take up less space on the screen. It's auto adjusting the width, so I just adjusted the height. I just adjusted the height to set how much space I wanted it to take up in a vertical direction, and then it kind of just filled in. It maintains the ratio between width and height. So that was how I chose to set that up. So as you can see, this is pretty much what I had before. If I hover, notice if I hover over these different links, they light up because they're changing color. I have a hover anchor tag with a hover the pseudo element means not just any anchor tag, but only for anchor tags that have the mouse hovering over them. Set the color to red. You can do a lot of cool things with that. I could also set the background color. Just say like gray. So now it like lights up the whole thing. I think I like it the other way though. So anyway, that is a walkthrough of how to create really like a much more complete website with pretty significant style changes that we've added with the CSS, and it's starting to really come together and look like a website. So that is all for this video. I'll see you next time.